Sorry about that. We didn't have sound there. So, Shalom. This is our Wednesday evening study, Renewing Your Mind. This is part 6. Um, so I actually, this isn't the most important one, but this is a very, very important one. Our most important one is actually the next one that we do, the next session. Even so, I want to talk a little bit about this series. So there's a few things that are very important. The first one is I want you to understand the reason I'm doing this series is not because I am pro psychological community, pro mental health, all that kind of stuff. I am pro sound mind because some things that the psychological community has determined are not necessarily a sound mind are still considered a sound mind in Scripture. Now, the reason that's important is because we do need to make a distinction here. We need to make a distinction that this is a spiritual discussion because we are spiritual beings. We are not humans who occasionally have a spiritual experience. If you're a human who occasionally has a spiritual experience, you probably are in the category of what we would call a weak mind, but also you are probably carrying some wounds and some limiting beliefs that are causing you not to be inferior, but to be less effective in this world. Okay? You're driving down the road and you look at you somebody cuts you off or something, and you look at that person and you think, oh my gosh, they're such a jerk, they're just a horrible human being. You create a scenario of a list of things that's wrong with that person, and yet there is an element or an experience of you don't know. When I say experience, is you could have that moment or you could choose not to have that moment, but you don't know why they made that traffic mistake. In your brain, it's that big old honking truck with the black smoke billowing out the side of it, and you're just convinced that person's just a jerk because they cut you off. When the truth is that he might be heading to the ICU to be with his little girl for a few more hours or something. We don't know, right? But our mind has a tendency to react to danger with fear. I'll get to that. But then also we react to danger with anger. And actually, they're kind of one of the same. That's because you and I, the rest of the world, looks at this world as if it needs to change. We look around, we say, oh, that thing over there, it needs to change. Oh, this over here needs to change. This over here needs to change. And the truth is the change is not going to happen because everybody's doing that. Everybody's going, oh, they need to change this. Well, who's they? Who's they? The government? Doubt it. The HOA? Doubt it. Right? And so as a result of that, we kind of have this issue of like, I don't know, almost like it's not my fault. It's not anybody's fault. And or it's everybody else's fault. That's what I mean to say. It's everybody else's fault. This is the kind of the reaction, as it were, that we have with things. Now, furthermore, should we identify that change actually needs to occur, we will look at the situation and determine that if something were going to change, if something changed, we would do better. Well, if they didn't have all the potholes, if they fixed all the potholes in the road, then I wouldn't speed as much. Right? That kind of thing. Okay. So we're expecting the world to change. We're expecting everything around us to change on behalf of us. The guy in the truck needs to drive better. For whom? For you, right? For you. So what is all that? Is that just some big old ego trip and we're a bunch of narcissists and it's all about us? No, it's actually worse. It's actually worse. I want to talk to you tonight about the life trap. Now, I believe that that's a term that's actually used in a very specific book. So I'm just going to flip it around a little bit here. And I'm just going to say your mind prison. Okay. Now, behind me is a cell. And the reason I'm standing in front of this cell is because there's a point in time in this discussion where I am just going to switch this over and take me off the camera, and I want you to stare at it. And the reason I do is not because I want you to have an understanding of prison reform or the lack thereof. It's not because I want to complain about the conditions of that cell. It's not because I want to, you know, show that the door is open and that people have gotten out. It's not because I want to, you know, make some sort of statement about being put in a cell. None of that. The reason why I am showing you this right here is because you all really, really, really need to realize the level at which you are trapped in your brain with the damage that has been done and with the other things that you have with you. So we're going to talk about those really quick. In the times past, I have talked at length about wounds, done many sermons on wounds. I've done a little bit about limiting beliefs, but this part here is basically the result. Let me give you an example. Okay. Let's say that there is two friends, and there's one friend who has an emotional need, and the other friend is kind of oblivious to that because their personality kind of moves in the direction of autopilot, right? And so that friend begins to feel resentment, right? Feel resentment for the other friend kind of neglecting the emotional needs of that friend. Now, what's intriguing about this is that nobody talks to anybody else in this situation. And so basically, everybody's just kind of making assumptions, and we're talking about typical relationship process here, right? Assumptions, lack of communication, needs for validation that shouldn't be coming from a human anyways, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a perfect storm of damage that's about to occur. How and why? Well, the person continues to neglect, and what happens is as that temporary let this slide off your back kind of moment occurs, and then another one occurs, you start kind of running out of you start running out of let them slide off your back, right? And so as a result of that, there's this moment in time where that resentment starts to have an emotional attachment to it of anger. Really, it's frustration, but the truth is that anger, fear, frustration, and confusion all seem to have the same hormonal process of adrenaline, right? Of adrenaline rising up and that kind of that ball of fire feeling. Well, there's a few reasons why this is important, because when we go from resentment to bitterness, one of the things that's going to happen is we now have an emotional attachment to an anchor in your mind that now becomes the reference point for that information. That's bitterness. When it anchors to your mind, instead of it just being a resentment that it could potentially be forgivable. Well, once that bitterness has ensued and that becomes the anchor in your mind, now all of a sudden there is a time period there where that bitterness is the only information your brain has about the trustworthiness of a friend, or about a friend meeting needs. And so now another friend comes along and they have a schedule conflict and have to cancel, and immediately you're triggered. This is the beginning of the death of the brain, so to speak. Why do I say that? Well, because once you begin to operate in that area of triggers, something unfortunate happens. And the unfortunate thing that happens is that there's literally a moment in time when what actually starts to what actually starts to attach itself to your reality is friends aren't trustworthy. Now, in that process, then what we find is that a lot of times we just stop trusting friends, stop wanting friends. That's the depth of this bitterness. It's the depth of this pain, right? Okay, so now the next thing that we need to address, what happens concerning our identity in all of this? Well, there's a few things. Obviously, if we're seeking that external validation and that friend doesn't give it, then there's a tendency for us to believe that we are not validated and therefore not worthy, not a good person, not whatever we needed the validation in, right? Not a good mechanic, not a good painter, not a good architect, etc. Right? Okay. So now the reason why it's relevant to think in those terms of identity is because once you take on an identity, remember from part 3, I believe it was, that you actually become what it is you believe you are. Well, what's crazy about this is, and people don't realize this, is once you start to be that person, you will attract like kind to you. So let's just for a moment go ahead and let's take kind of a different approach here. Let's talk about one of the 10 commandments. Let's talk about stealing. So you're at a department store. You see a nice ring on there, some bling. You feel like, yeah, man, it'll make me look like one of them rappers, get some ice on my finger. And so now I'm going to take this and I'm just going to slip it on my finger and I'm going to walk away. Well, when I take that, as soon as I do that, there's a number of things that have occurred. Number one is the law of reciprocation is activated. You now have to be stolen from. Now, here's the intrigue of this. The moment that you stole, you believed that you were a thief, capable of stealing and not getting caught. Or maybe you believed you're a thief that would get caught, and so you do get caught. But what's amazing about it is, regardless of how it goes, what you believe about yourself is what you will do. So somewhere along the lines, you took upon yourself that identity. You take upon yourself the identity of abuser, take upon yourself identity of an alcoholic, take upon yourself the identity of a thief, take upon yourself identity of a betrayer, right? So now, couple things that happens. The first is that the law of reciprocation is a force enacted by the concept of reaping and sowing. Call it karma. There's some things with karma that I have a problem with. Call it what comes around goes around. Okay, fine. But you now have to be stolen from. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? Now there's mercy involved there, and we can talk about that. But the premise is that as you steal, you now need to be stolen from because of that cycle that's coming around to you again, right? Okay, but there's more. So two things. Number one is when you violate Torah, right? You violate your conscience. So when you violate Torah, because remember it says, if a Gentile who, though not having the law, does the things of the law, then he shows himself to be a law unto himself, and that what? His that the law has been written on his heart, and that his conscience accuses or defends him. Now, the reason why this is important is because once you start to get into conscience, right and wrong, you start to get into the knowledge of good and evil. You start eating from that fruit, which means what? You think in your mind you're not worthy. So let's say somebody comes along and they give you a gift. Let's say that somebody comes along, a friend of yours comes along and says, "Hey man, I see you're trying to be one of those, those thug rappers, and so I bought you this ring. It's got some diamonds on it, and I was hoping maybe it would inspire you, and it's better than the ring you stole." Where's your brain going to go with that? I don't deserve this. Well, guess what? You're right. If you believe that, then that's true, right? I don't deserve this. And so, boom, now you begin inviting to yourself dessert. What do I mean by that? What you do and don't deserve, you invite to yourself, right? So in that sense, you feel, let's say that you do something and it's not something that necessarily would be rewarded, but you expect a reward. The whole time that you're doing that work, you're thinking that you're going to get that reward. Regardless of whether you do or don't, your mind is set on it. You are going to start to what? You're going to start to act like you're getting that reward. So, why is this so important? Well, it's because when we're talking about sin, we're talking about a choice we make based upon an identity. But then we're going to take it a step further and we're going to say that when we talk about a violation of our conscience, we have to what? We have to sear our conscience, right? That's what it says in scripture. You got to, or it says in the Bible and in the New Testament, they seared their conscience being seared. What does that mean? You cauterize it to where it doesn't just flow guilt, right? You figure out a way in your brain to make it okay. But here's the interesting thing about it. Now you have a ring that was given to you that is worth a lot more than the ring that you stole. You have your brain thinking you don't deserve either one and that you're a horrible person. And what you believe about yourself, you're going to do. So now you're going to be a horrible person. Well, that just kind of rolls downhill, if you get my drift, the proverbial waste, right? And so as a result of that, what we have is that you're now going to what? You're going to wound somebody, or you're going to destroy property, as it were, because you're not going to have the mechanism to be a good person because you don't believe you are a good person, right? Okay, so then what we do is we try to come up with some sort of compensation to make us feel like a good person again. So we go to a charity and volunteer, and meanwhile we're stealing from the back because you believe you're a thief, right? Stealing from the back, and then eventually maybe you get caught, and now all of a sudden it's even worse. That is actually not the life trap. What's the life trap? The life trap is the part where you actually surround yourself with people who will treat you a certain way to what? To create a confirmation bias, proving that it's your fate, that you're that thing. Welcome to prison. The moment that your wounds and limiting beliefs create an identity, you are done. Life sentence. There is no returning from that outside of a miracle. Because what's interesting about it is that you'll have all kinds of information, input, telling you it's what you are, it's who you are. And you've completely missed the mark that you are a high maintenance child of God. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God, thereby eliminating the ability to what? To add or take away from the title child of God. Meaning what? Meaning it is not your choice to be a child of God. It is your choice to reject the teaching and instruction of God. By the way, that Hebrew word is Torah, translated as law. But it is also your choice how you allow yourself to be treated and how you're treated. Now, here's the intrigue. Let's say that we have somebody who, when they were a child, their mother left their father with, say, the 3 kids and split. And the truth is nobody knows where she's at. Now you're an adult. You have what? A violation of a basic need of what? Of feeling like they are going to consistency, right? Feeling like they're going to come home, right? So now here's the interesting thing that's going to happen. Number one, your personality, because of that basic need, is going to become a basic fear. And we're going to get into this when we get into the imagination section of this. But your fear is actually going to create a construct that says that people don't stay. So you're going to attract to yourself by matching the personality and by matching the dysfunction. Your brain is going to actually assess 2 minutes of interaction with a human being, and you're going to attract to yourself people who will abandon you. And why do we do that? Because we believe that identity, that we are somebody who either deserves to be abandoned, and that's a hard one, because a lot of people will say that. They'll say, I deserve to have a bad relationship. And they're not talking about anything they've done wrong. What they're saying is this is my fate. This is what I was born with. It's a curse, whatever, right? When the truth is that all it was some childhood need that was either violated or neglected, now has become the basic need, the basic fear of the entire personality set. And in addition to that, now is the basic lifestyle. You actually are going to live as an abandoned person, seeking people to abandon you, attracting people to you that will abandon you, because that's your fear. How do I know? Because when we fear, we compensate. We make adjustments that we should not make. Because remember, fear is a construct. Now, the reason why this is so important is because when we get into the idea of a life trap, what people don't realize is how powerful this really is. Let's say that a child is raised by a parent who's overly protective, okay? So now all of a sudden, child gets sick, and a lot of times it's when the child is sick. But the child gets sick, and now the parent is home with the child all the time, and they're deeply ingrained into each other. All of a sudden, the child knows about the parents' bills. The child knows about the parents' relationship issues, et cetera, right? It's a common ground where there's a vulnerability and there's a compensation for that vulnerability by there being too close of an interconnectedness. Can even sometimes lead to inappropriate relationship interactions between a parent and their child. But in principle, basically, now they have come to become an adult and they're always needing to call their mother. They're always needing to go over and check on their mother. They're always needing, mother needs to come to the house and live with us so we can take care of her, blah, 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 right? But then they also attract the person who's going to be too much in their business and not give them enough independence, because that's a basic human need, is independence. It's sometimes some people have suppressed it, some people it's a minimal need, but it's still present. There's a need to be independent. In fact, one of the biggest journeys from absolute wreck to absolute miracle effective person is learning how to not be dependent, right? And so we're seeking independence even as part of our healthy actions. But no, we're not going to do that. We're going to surround ourselves with people who will what? Obsess about us and obsess about why? Because it's a basic fear. And so what we'll do is we'll make little tiny adjustments in our neurolinguistic behavior. Okay, what that means is our body language, our facial expressions. We will actually make adjustments that attract another abandoner, attract another obsessor, right? And so the premise is that what the life trap does is it takes the limiting beliefs and the wound, creates an identity, and that identity then traps us into this kind of cycle, but more just this dysfunctional lifestyle. Remember, all lifestyle is a practice of culture. Remember, all culture is a set of beliefs and actions that cause a person to, or a people grouping to be unique. What does that mean? That means that what you believe about yourself and what you do create what? A culture. Practicing that culture creates a lifestyle. That lifestyle is actually a life imprisonment of your brain that you can't break out of. It takes a good miracle. It does. Pain is a catalyst for change. Discomfort is a catalyst for change. And like I've said before, you will have a threshold. You'll think in your mind, I really need to change. Then you'll have a threshold to cross. You'll have a temptation to stay right where you're at. And you cross that threshold, and then all of a sudden something will hit, and it'll be a shock point of discomfort, and it will propel you forward away from that situation. But otherwise, that's just not present. And we can get people who go through this. For example, the child who's raised not to receive things because that's a waste of time, or because that's something that I don't agree with that you should have, or those type of things. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's realistic limitations that should be considered, but you can't take your junk from your generation and your identity and superimpose it upon their generation and their identity. Meaning you can't sit there and say, oh, well, you know what? I actually, when I was a kid, I did painting. I don't know why you sit and watch TV all day, right? And so then you what? Are superimposing that expectation on them. And therefore, let me tell you what that is going to create. That is going to create somebody who feels entitled to things they are not entitled to. Because why? These are going to sneak out and try to accomplish it. They're going to go behind your back and try to accomplish it. They are going to somehow stay within their genre and within their generation of information and media and entertainment. So now the adult comes along and they're entitled to everything. This is probably your classic narcissist. They feel entitled to food. They feel entitled to room and board. They feel entitled to whatever, right? Because they did not get the opportunity to have an option to choose or not choose. And so now they're going to choose or not choose everything. And they're going to say, I'm entitled to it because I didn't have it when I was younger, right? Okay, so the principle is now they have a life prison thing going on, right? Where they are trapped. They're trapped. So first of all, what's the basic need? The basic need was realistic limitations, right? What's the basic fear? Limitations. And so what? They're going to react in one of three ways. They're going to counterattack it, which means they're going to break those limitations. They're going to surrender to it, and they're going to fall into the subjugation type of a situation where they feel like they have to be controlled by somebody else, or they're going to withdraw from it. And guess how you withdraw? You substance abuse. You check out. And the way that those withdrawings occur is through the use of alcohol, the use of opiates, whatever, to what? To escape from that basic fear of limitations. Whoa, that's heavy, right? So now you actually have somebody drinking because they can't stand the fact that there's laws. Scary. Okay, but you get my point here. This is a trap that you have to break out of. Now, it is a combination of embracing your wounds. Oh, you know what? When I was 6 years old, my dad beat my dog until he died, and now I feel like I have to save all the animals in the world. That's a victim. That's walking in your wound. That's embracing your wound. That is not effective. That is not proactive. That is not the right way to do that. Because why? What's going to happen? Every single human being who does some sort of discipline to a dog is going to be evil in your sight. And you're going to attract people who what? Who hurt animals. Do you get it? So the premise is that now we have this what? We have this wound that we embrace, and it becomes our trap. Limiting belief. Oh, you know what? You will never amount to anything. Do you realize that if you believe that truth, okay? Notice I didn't say a lie. If you believe that truth, you've made it truth. And it doesn't matter whether it's a lie or not. Once it's in your brain and you buy into it, you are now going to do what you believe you are. And now what's going to happen? You're going to attract people to you who will help you fail. You're going to attract people to you who will help you lose and not succeed. You are not going to attract. You think you are. This is the part that's the irony to this, is these traps that I'm talking about, which there's many. Now, there's some people who have narrowed them down to like 12 or 11 of them, whatever. The truth is I can take a basic need, a basic fear, and a personality and create a trap out of it and show you all the people in your life that you've attracted to that. You go through the sessions with me, you go through my program, you'll learn that. You have attracted the same people over and over and over again. Now, in that process, I will tell you that there is also intervention. We're still talking about the divine here. We're still talking about spiritual and relationship and all that kind of stuff. Don't think this is just some bleak, hopeless matter. Okay. The intensification of all power in the universe doesn't make junk. He's pretty good at making pretty awesome things. You just have to learn how to be awesome. And one of the ways that you choose not to be awesome is by embracing your limiting beliefs and embracing your wounds, thereby creating an identity that is false. And if you create an identity that is false, then guess what? You are going to be that thing. You're going to attract those things. And when I say attract those things, please understand, there's plenty we could talk about how the universe is obedient to our dominion as Adam, but I'm talking about straight up facial expressions, dress, linguistic processes of body language, voice tone, all that stuff will attract the person who is your basic fear. So, what good does it do for us to have this knowledge? What happens when we have this knowledge? Does it make it any easier to break out of a life trap? Mm-mm. No, you need intervention. You usually need somebody else to identify your blind spots. You know, I was driving the vehicle the other day, and there is a manual for it. Well, first of all, the blind spot warning system went off, right? And so I was curious about it. I want to learn more about it. So I opened the manual, and it's talking about these certain degrees of area that the radar is able to identify. And basically the steering wheel, the brakes will be applied, and the steering wheel will not allow you to move into that lane. And I was just thinking about all the different components that had to go into a blind spot. A simple glance back now is governed by all of these restrictions and steering and all this other stuff. When is it cool? I mean, how many of us actually look behind us when we change lanes, right? But the premise is that you need something to identify your blind spots. You need to go to a counselor. You can come to me. You can contact me and say, hey, I would like to go through your program. And if that happens, then please understand, I'm going to identify those life traps. I'm going to identify your personality. I'm going to identify how you steal people's energy, all that kind of stuff. Because why? We want to create a new identity. But then what we want to do is start using our 4 human endowments and stop acting like apes. So we can either be a sapien, or we can be a supernatural powerhouse of change for this world. But here's the irony. Even though you may now know this knowledge, you may now understand, you're probably looking back now going, man, I dated the same guy over and over and over again, right? Or you could say, hey, man, I swear I went through 3 different schools and I had the same issue at each school. Well, maybe you need to check that issue, right? I think it is important to understand that having this knowledge does not change you. It doesn't. You need to begin to initiate change, and the rest will happen on its own. And the reason it will is because you've shown initiative. It's crazy. Even if you start to think about that you don't like who you are, or you don't like that trap, your neurolinguistic cues that people's brains just read and identify and create information and all kinds of things in their brain as a result of watching you for 2 minutes will change. You will start to do things differently just by thinking that you need to. So if you've identified tonight, if you've watched this video, and maybe it's not tonight, but if you've watched this video and you feel like, you know what, I have an identity problem. I am actually going through an identity crisis that's actually a lifetime identity crisis. And in that identity, you believe that you're something that you're not. And unfortunately, that means you are something that you're not. And unfortunately, that means you do things that you shouldn't and don't want to do. It's very rare that a human comes along and really actually wants to do bad things. I know that sounds asinine because our prisons are full, right? Our prisons are overcrowded. But the truth is that that didn't start that way, right? I know that there's a field of psychology in abnormal psychology, forensic psychology specifically, that tries to identify patterns that would prove that it is actually nature and not nurture, that there is actually a genetic. In fact, I once had a relationship with a person who absolutely believed that they could identify whether people were a psychopath or not by how they sat in a chair at a restaurant or something like that. I can't remember how that went, or how they held a piece of paper. That person would hand you a piece of paper and the way you took it. But I don't know, too much YouTube, I think. But the point is that there's a field of psychology that tries to say that you are born with a disposition to be evil and psychopathic. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? It's not psychology, it's religion. Oh, Christianity, that's right. It's doctrine. It's a claim that God created evil people. You say, "Oh no, wait a minute. Adam sinned and then that started the seed of sin and so now there's sin in every one of us because of his sinful nature." For you parents, when your child was born, did you think in your mind, "Oh, you know what? That one's gonna go and kill 10 people and bury them under a amusement park"? No. That didn't go through a parent's brain. They look at their child, "Oh, he's so beautiful," right? I mean, there's not a principle of that, "Oh, yeah, that one's gonna be a problem." There are people who look at their children and wonder how in the world they were so messed up, right? They look at their child in the bassinet and they're like, "Oh, it did something right." Right? They don't think in their mind original sin, evil, going to hell, right? It doesn't work that way. That's not how we think. No, that comes later on when the kids start setting fires to the trailer park and stuff, right? I mean, it's not a set in stone thing. People don't just have an intention to do evil. There's all kinds of factors on why they've gotten to that point. Now, does that mean I'm trying to have sympathy for the people who are in darkness? Oh, I hope you caught what I just said. Have sympathy for the people who are in darkness? As if what? As if there's a difference? As if I'm not in darkness? As if I'm not in that cell? I've got wounds. I've got limiting beliefs that I still react to. I react to fears, the same fears I probably reacted to when I was 21 years old. I have the same type of stuff going on. But I can tell you there is a light at the end of this tunnel. And I can tell you that this system of process was given to you by your Messiah, was given to you by Jesus Christ. Now, if there's somebody out there watching our Renewing Your Mind series and saying in their mind, "Oh, well, there we go. I don't believe in God and I don't believe in Christ, so that means we don't need to listen anymore." Well, here's the interesting thing about it. All I've told you in this series is that your subconscious mind creates information based upon perception, and that perception is based upon limiting beliefs and wounds. Nowhere in there have I said anything about doctrine or that you need to believe a certain way. Why? Because remember at the beginning of this thing, I said, hey, you become a Christian, and there's that time where you're like, oh yeah, go buy the Bible. I'm going to go down to the homeless shelter and feed the guys. I'm going to go over to this place over here and I'm start witnessing to these people and talk to the gang members and blah, blah, blah. And then adversity starts to hit and they go finish their honeymoon period and they are what? Jaded, disillusioned. Why? Because they're still a jerk. They're still drinking. They're still fighting with their spouse. Oh, there was this wonderful time and bliss of accepting Christ and blah, blah, blah. And the preacher said, I'm changed. And in 2 Corinthians 5:17, behold, a man becomes a new creation if he is in Christ. You should learn what it means to be in Christ. But then also there's that principle that basically, I'm going to church on Sunday. I'm singing the songs. Oh, they feel so good. I feel so good. Why am I still afraid? Why am I still mean? Why am I still drinking? Because you never healed. You never healed from your life traps. You never realized how destructive your personality is when it is in an unhealthy state. You embraced your wounds, embraced your limiting beliefs, and have a false identity because you don't understand what Yeshua actually said. So I could go through enough proofs. I've done it before with atheists and with other people to show that we at least got intelligent design, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do any of that. One of the things that I've learned over time is that if this information is not acceptable, it's not for you. And quite frankly, you're a part of the problem. You are that group of people. You're in that group of people who won't change and who will continue to wound and who will continue to cause this world to be a mess. Now, I know that sounds arrogant, but remember, I never said I was perfect. And I never said that I have been liberated from this stuff. I'm learning just as much as you are. But I may as well share it with you, right? I mean, how about Rabbi Q just gets off for 6 months and doesn't talk to you anymore and learns a bunch of stuff and doesn't share it with you? Come on, it's better to share it, right? But here's the other part that's kind of cool is when, as I say, oh yeah, I'm still this way, or I still have this darkness, then I actually will what? I will think that I probably need to change it. Why? Because I'm telling you to, and I don't like hypocrites. I hate them actually. And so as a result of that, I'm now going to initiate more change in it. So it's interesting how that works out. Should consider actually getting into public speaking and telling people how to live their lives, because you'll learn how to live yours real quick. So I think one of the more important elements that we need to establish is your basic need was a need that was neglected. Your response to that basic need is to be afraid that it is never going to be filled. That's just a simple survival technique of being afraid, right? In of that, you will respond in one of three ways. As you respond to that basic fear, you will counterattack it. You will surrender to it, or you will pretend like it's not there and get all doped up so you don't even have to pretend. In that process, that will now become the trap. You will attract people to you that do the same thing that the person did who neglected the need to begin with. Why? Because you are making adjustments to fear that you shouldn't be making. And we will get more into that next week. But I at least want to say this. Fear is a construct. It is not your reality. It is a reality you create and physically, emotionally, and mentally react to and what? Adjust to. Right? I don't know how many times, this is going to sound funny. I don't know how many times I felt like I had a tail, right? I'll be driving and the person will make the same lane change as me, and I'm like, okay, this goes back to, my training days, and I'm like, okay, we have a problem, and so I'll take evasive maneuvers, right? And the person will turn off on some street, and I'll be like, okay, fine, I'll leave it alone, right? It's not necessarily a paranoia, but it's that concept, right, of having a basic fear about something and making an adjustment to it, right? Okay, so in all of this, do you think after everything that you've learned thus far, after everything that you've heard thus far, you can go back and watch part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5, and this one, and see a nice little progression of information. Do you think that maybe you're a little bit more screwed up than you thought? It's kind of funny. I have, in times past, had this idea in my head that I was going to find somebody who was normal, right? And this goes back 20, 26 some years, whatever. I'm going to find somebody to be in a relationship with and maybe even spend the rest of my life with who's normal. And it was weird because I got disillusioned after a while, after about 3 or 4 women, of going, how am I missing this? Right? Like, I was at this church function and met this person. Are you serious right now? That's how messed up they are, right? And so I'm like, well, it's just a, a bad a bad draw or whatever, it's the luck of the draw or whatever. But the truth is that in that process of me thinking I needed to find somebody normal, I actually had a fear of not being normal. And so what I was attracting to myself, not normal people. But the truth is what is normal. And I had to learn that too, right? I had to kind of heal from that little distortion that there's such a thing as normal. No, you're all screwed up, and you're probably way more screwed up than you think. You're probably hurting people more than you think you are. You are probably setting limiting beliefs upon your children that you don't even realize that you're doing, and you're probably creating wounds that you don't even realize you're doing, and you need to stop. Because why? Because you're the change that this world needs. And if you're the change that this world needs and you are derelict of that, then this world's not going to change. So we'll just go home and sit on our duff, and we will have no change. And we will just look out the window and watch the world go by and blame everybody else and say that, man, they need to change that. There should be a law. There should be this. There should be that. You know how many times I've sat there and been driving and been like, oh man, there should be a law about that. Do you know there's a process for that? Where you could actually go and affect that change? Nobody will, right? They're like, we'll just leave that to the politicians. We'll just leave that to the lobbyists, whatever. But the truth is if it's really that big of a concern, and that could be a good check too, right? Well, there ought to be a law about that. Well, are you willing to sign a petition? Are you willing to make a petition? Are you willing to try to get that on the ballot? No, never mind. Okay, fine. We're done with that, right? That would be a really good way to fix that little attitude. But the premise is that if you are derelict of your responsibility to be the change that this world needs, there's not going to be change. Somebody has to take the initiative, right? That'd be you. That'd be you. And I promise you, the next thing that's going to happen in the next few days is you're going to think a little bit about what I've said, but you're going to see how much you are actually in this comfort zone of process and not actually want to change. I say there's some people who need to just stop talking for like a week. There are plenty of Christians who fast, but there's not enough Christians who just don't shut up, right? Somebody who just stops talking, and during that time, realize the things that they would have said, it'll blow your mind. Just stop talking for a week. Try it. You fast for a week, you go without food for a week. You can go with it. I mean, you can write down, you can text, you can do all that, right? Just stop talking. Right? Who knows? Who knows? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. But I want to kind of just throw in this little shameless plug, as it were, for this next session that's coming. Session number 7, part 7 of this, you do not want to miss, because I'm telling you right now, remember, it is the wounds, the limiting beliefs, and what? Lack of imagination that makes you ineffective. When we get into imagination, everything is going to change. And your entire paradigm about reality is going to change when we get into imagination. Okay, so at any rate, we will go ahead and end this for tonight. But I just wanted to say that there is no condemnation here. You need to know, okay? I go back and watch these messages and get uncomfortable, okay? The Renewing Your Mind series makes me uncomfortable. Why? Because I'm comfortable in my junk, right? Okay, so look, there's no condemnation here. I'm not sitting here saying you're an abuser, you're destroying people's lives. It's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is say, look, we got to do something different. And if we don't do something different, this is going to get worse. And worse means the next generation is going to be an absolute mess. Remember, what we allow in moderation, the next generation is going to take to the extreme. And what we take to the extreme, the next generation is going to blow out of proportion, right? They're going to completely blow it up. We need to make an adjustment. We are spiritual beings having a human experience for a purpose. Maybe that purpose is beyond your understanding right now, but in general, we need to make that adjustment. We need to think in our brains, I am not a human being religious. Religion is a mess. Religion is a mess. But I am a spiritual being trying to be spiritual in a human experience. It will change. There is hope. I think that if there was something that you could get out of tonight, is to see where you're trapped. But I didn't say that it was hopeless. I said it was hopeless without a miracle. Meaning what? You need the mythos. You need the spiritual. You need the unexplainable to repair this thing, right? I mean, even Alcoholics Anonymous, which I absolutely loathe because of their identity statement. Hello, I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, you say that, then you still are, right? But the premise is that there is just something in there that talks about the simplicity of admitting that a power greater than themselves could restore them. It is so important to understand that this is about the supernatural. Even though that I'm speaking about the psychological, you need to remember that suke logios, right? Suke logios, suke logos, psychology is the study of the soul. Suke in Greek is soul. Okay. Well, I look forward to the Imagination series. It's going to kind of be a mini series within this series. It will be big and it will be very different and will be probably uncomfortable, but I believe that it is going to be phenomenal. I believe that it's going to help a lot of people, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for your prayers and support and all those things to get us to that moment when we finally do that session. Okay. All right. So I will say shalom and go ahead and exit the room, and you guys have a good evening.